We pay attention to the people who have the power to tax us. That's another reason I don't care about Pennsylvania, right? It doesn't have the power to tax me. Actually, it does tax my wages. But that's probably not the best example because I do work in Pennsylvania. But I don't care about Virginia because Virginia can't reach into my pocket. I care about the state of Maryland because it reaches into my pocket every year. I care about the federal government because it reaches into my pocket every year. Preserving the Union means creating a federal government with power to act directly on people. I just said that. All right, let's move on. We must not sacrifice our liberty or Republican form of government. Here's the problem. If you give the federal government power to act directly on the people, you're creating the possibility of tyranny. You're creating the possibility that that power will be abused. Madison defines a republic as, quote, a government which derives all of its powers directly or indirectly from the great power of the people, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. We want to keep the republic. That's the famous line when Franklin's leaving the convention after the Constitution's been signed and all their work is done, and somebody in the crowd says, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he says, a republic, if you can keep it. One of the things that the Constitution guarantees the citizens of the United States is a Republican form of government. It doesn't guarantee them a democracy. It guarantees them a Republican form of government, meaning a government in which the powers of it are derived directly or indirectly from the great body of the people. History teaches us, however, that republics are small, that republics are short-lived, that republics quickly become divided. This is where Montesquieu comes in. Madison and Jefferson, they knew their Montesquieu. They read their Montesquieu. And if history told us anything, it was that republics were short-lived, that they were always faction-ridden, and that they became paralyzed internally, which made them prey to their foreign enemies. So the question is, how are we going to be able to preserve a republic and yet still preserve the power of the United States? Hence it is that such democracies have been spectacles of turbulence and contention, and in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Not very encouraging. Right? Now, the one Federalist paper that you should read, the one that is most commonly read, and certainly the one that is most commonly cited, is Federalist number 10. So we'll just take a little bit of time and walk through Federalist number 10. Federalist number 10 is written by Madison. Federalist number 10 is considered to be the single best distillation of his genius, of what he was trying to accomplish in drafting the Constitution. In this particular Federalist paper, Madison says, factions are the chief threat to republics. When you give people their liberty, you give them the opportunity to form factions, to form parties, to act out of their own selfish interests. By a faction, I mean a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest. It doesn't matter what the impulse, passion, or interest is. People unite and get together and pursue that one specific interest at the expense of other people pursuing other interests. The causes of faction are liberty and property. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire. If you want to get rid of faction, the way you get rid of faction is you get rid of liberty. Right? North Korea does not have faction, right? Because North Korea is not free. And people don't have freedom of association and freedom of press and all that stuff. If you give people liberty, you are going to have faction. Therefore, the problem becomes, how do you control them? Madison, the most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who are creditors and those who are debtors, a landed interest, a manufacturing interest, a mercantile interest, a moneyed interest, with many lesser interests grow up of necessity in civilized nations and divide them into different classes actuated by different sentiments and views. When you give people liberty, you give people property, right? It's liberty that what allows us to cultivate and amass property. North Korea doesn't have faction because it doesn't have liberty. It doesn't have property either, right? If people have liberty, they have property, they're going to have faction. And what he's taking here is that this is really a kind of a class-based analysis. People develop different social classes based on the type of property that they have. You have a manufacturing interest, a mercantile interest, a landed interest, a money interest. One of the greatest divides is between people who are creditors, people who loan money, and people who are debtors, people who borrow money, right? So, the worst kind of faction is a majority faction, because they abuse the liberty of the minority. But by extending the sphere of government, we can dilute the impact of factions that are based on small, local, narrow-minded interests. And so here, we'll take as our sample this room, all right? We are the people of Adams County here. We have 51% of us who grow apples for a living. Okay? And we have 49% of us who sell Civil War memorabilia for a living. We have the potential here in a democratic form of government for a tyranny of the majority, a faction, 51% apple growers, who want to spray their pesticides throughout the county, which smell really bad and drive away tourists. And the Civil War memorabilia faction is going to suffer. It's going to suffer a loss of customers. It's going to suffer a loss of property in terms of its business, its interests, because of this tyranny of the majority, a faction of 51% of the apple growers. That's the concern. And that, according to Madison, is what's been happening on state governments. Right? Factions, tyrannies of the majority have been popping up in the state governments. The worst one, the poster child for all this, the state of Rhode Island. The smallest state in the Union had been paralyzed by political faction during the 1780s. And the biggest divide in Rhode Island was between a majority faction of debtors, people who owed money, and a minority faction of creditors, bankers, people who loaned money. What had the state legislature of Rhode Island done? Well, its majority had passed legal tender laws, making it mandatory for the minority of creditors to accept worthless paper money printed by the state as payment for debts. That's what legal tender laws do, right? They say this is legal tender for the payment of debts, public and private. If you're the merchant and I'm the poor farmer who's come to you with this worthless currency and said, here, I'm paying off my debt, you say, that money's no good to me. I can't use that to pay my creditors in Britain. I say, I don't care. The state of Rhode Island says I've discharged my debt to you. I'm done. I'm washing my hands of it. That's what he's talking about. That's what he's concerned about. And so the issue is going to become, how do you prevent those factions on a larger scale? He says, well, if you extend the sphere of government, you take in greater variety of parties and interests. You make less probable a majority of the whole who will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens. The minute we take our apple growers and our Civil War memorabilia people, and we put them in a much larger electoral district that also includes state government employees in Harrisburg, and shishi antique dealers in Frederick, and manufacturing interests in Chambersburg, and so forth, it's going to be much harder for any one faction to dominate the whole. And so by extending the sphere of government, you will actually dilute the negative impact of faction. The influence of fascist leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through other states. A rage for paper money, for the abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project will be less likely to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it. See what he's getting at here? The federal government, by extending the sphere of government, by extending the sphere of representation, is going to have factions cancel each other out, and is going to create a better government for the whole of the Union than the individual states could. Look at some of the things he's talking about. A rage for paper money, for the abolition of debts, for an equal division of property. He's not talking, interestingly enough, here about slavery, but it's on his mind. He's a slaveholder, right? At this time in the United States, there's a big wave of anti-slavery sentiment. States north of the Mason-Dixon have abolished slavery. The minority of slaveholders in the country is getting a little nervous here, right? What if there's a majority that wants to abolish slavery? His plan here is to protect the property of people in minority factions, creditors versus debtors, slaveholders versus people who would prefer to abolish slavery. So that's the argument that he's making about why this new federal government is going to get the job done. Right? It is going to protect people of different classes, different interests, different property by extending the sphere of government in such a way that, no faction will become powerful enough to threaten the liberty and property of the other. The Anti-Federalists are not buying. The Anti-Federalists take issue with what the Federalists say because they believe